A gold miner seeking fame and fortune gets trapped at the bottom of a 100-foot shaft full of rattlesnakes. This is John Waddell's worst nightmare. On October 15th, 2018, John Waddell, a 60-year-old gold miner, finally figured out where the gold was on his property. He had explored the mines many times, collecting rocks and researching the geology. He had been exploring these mines for nearly 20 years and had found gold in plenty of the abandoned mines. But now his research and experience was telling him that he had finally found the mother lode. There was one particular mine on his property that he knew was not depleted. It was approximately 90 miles northwest of Phoenix, Arizona, near the small town of Aguila. The mine had a vertical shaft entrance, so John would need to pack a pulley system and would have to lower himself into the mine. So, on Monday morning, October 15, 2018, John called his friend Terry Schrader and told him that he was heading down to the mine and would be back on Tuesday. This was standard practice for John. He would never go exploring in the mines without telling someone, usually Terry, where he was going and how long he would be. So, after telling Terry where he was going and when he would return, John gathered his supplies, including his various medications, and headed out for the mine. Even though he was 60 years old, this mine presented no problems for John. He was in great shape and had nearly 20 years of experience. He knew exactly what he was doing, where he was going. Also, he had previously been in this mine, so he knew exactly what he was getting into. Later that morning, he arrived at the opening to the mine shaft. As he had done many times before, he set up the pulley system, put on his harness, and hooked in. He began lowering himself into the dark mine shaft, which was approximately 100 feet deep. He had a headlamp to light his way and gradually lowered himself deeper and deeper into the darkness until something snapped. John was in a free fall. Instinctively, he grabbed the ropes that were still securely attached to the rigging above. He gripped the rope as tightly as he could with both hands, one covered in a glove, the other bare. The rope slid through the glove so fast that it instantly heated up, burning his hand inside the glove. The bare hand was much worse, as the skin was instantly removed from his palm, causing him to let go of the rope, continuing his free fall into the darkness below him. After a few seconds, he hit the ground. There was just enough light to see his left leg flip up to the right and his ankle flip to the left. Blinding pain shot through his body, and he instantly knew that he was in big trouble. John was now laying at the bottom of a 100-foot mine shaft with broken rigging and a broken leg. This was Monday morning, and no one was expecting him back until late Tuesday. He knew that he was going to be stuck there for a long time, with no food, no water, and no medication. He also knew that he immediately needed to do something about his leg. John had previously been an EMT, so he had good knowledge of what was about to happen and what he needed to do. The swelling would begin quickly, putting pressure on his leg, so he decided that it would be best to try and reset his leg before this happened, as it would be nearly impossible after the leg was swollen and tight. He looked around on the wet and muddy floor of the mine shaft and found a stick. This stick would be perfect for what he was planning to do. He ran the far end of the stick into his boot, pressing on the sole, then pushed as hard as he could. His legs stretched out until the bone in his leg snapped back into its correct position. The pain shot through his entire body, but he couldn't think about that now. He still had to deal with his foot, which was pointing the wrong direction. So he grabbed his foot and twisted it and turned it, trying to pop it back into the right position. But it didn't work. He tried for a while, and it was painful, but he could never get it quite right. He just had to leave the ankle and deal with it later. He got the ankle as straight as he could, and then tied off a stick, using it as a splint to support both his leg and his ankle. Once this was done, he leaned back to take a breath, opened his eyes, and saw a rattlesnake slithering down the wall right in front of him. He pulled out another stick and beat the snake until the snake was dead. Now, with his leg tied off and the snake dead, he had a moment to lean back and truly realize the situation that he was in. He felt the pain and the cold and wet of the mine. He started to go into shock and shake uncontrollably. He tried to stave this off by resting. He leaned back and took a deep breath, trying to calm himself as the batteries died in his only light. He laid in the darkness on his side, trying to be as comfortable as possible while listening to the outside, listening for any signs of life, any cars, any people, anything, but it was completely silent. He was laying on the cold, wet floor, but he had calmed down. He was just trying to focus on staying alive when he felt something move under his arm. He didn't hear it because his hearing was a little poor, and he didn't see it because it was dark. But he could feel it move. He could feel the vibration of the snake's tail. He waited, with no one coming for him for days, and the condition he was in, the last thing he needed was a bite from a rattlesnake. So he waited, for just the right moment. The snake slithered next to his arm. He slowly moved his hand closer to the snake. Then, when the snake was fully exposed, he grabbed it and threw it across the shaft, hearing the snake's body smack against the wall on the other side. In the darkness, with aging eyesight, he swung the stick over and over again, smacking the ground, smacking the snake, knowing that he must have hit it a few times. Not knowing if the snake was dead or not, he just kept swinging over and over until he was exhausted. Then he stopped and listened, and nothing. Nothing but silence. Now that this second snake was most likely dead, he leaned back to take a rest, thinking of the situation and the medications that he didn't take and wouldn't be able to take for the next couple of days, if he made it that long. Throughout that night, he just tried to stay comfortable and alive. He was getting more and more exhausted and more dehydrated, as he didn't have any water or any food. He waited throughout the night, then spent most of the next day yelling for help, knowing that most likely there was no one out there that could hear him. But he still had to maintain hope, but no one responded and no one came looking for him. John spent hours just trying to get comfortable. The space that he was in was only about 8 feet in diameter, but also included several barrels, barbed wire, a piece of metal, sticks, and rocks. Furthermore, the floor was damp and cold. He couldn't stretch out and was in constant pain. He ended up finding that laying slightly on his side, leaning up against the piece of metal, caused the least amount of pain. Throughout the day and night, John spent hours in the dark, cold, wet mine shaft. He would see glimpses of things here and there and hear small noises, then rattling. He didn't know where the snakes were coming from, but they were there, hiding in the shadows, behind the barrels, behind the rocks and sticks. John was actually fond of animals and didn't want to harm the snakes, but he knew that if he was bitten by one of these diamondbacks, his situation would become much worse. So when he heard the rattling, he grabbed his trusty stick and started whacking at it. Due to the darkness and his poor eyesight, he couldn't see much and never knew if he hit any of those snakes on the second day and night, but what he was doing at least kept them away from him, so he kept doing it. After the entire second day of yelling out into the desert hoping that someone would hear him, his throat and mouth were dry. His lips were cracked, his mouth was cracked, and his throat was raw. He needed some sort of relief. Luckily, the ground was damp. He just needed to extract the water. He pulled up some damp dirt and rocks and balled them up into his shirt. He squeezed on the ball and tried to suck out the water, but there was nothing. He couldn't get any water like this, so he resorted to something a little more desperate. He had blisters on his hands from the rope burns. He knew that there was liquid inside these blisters, so he raised his hands to his mouth, put the blisters inside his mouth, popped them, and sucked out the pus. Even this didn't provide much relief, but at least it was something. Tuesday had passed, and no sign of Terry or any other rescuers. Another long night set in, and by the next morning, the lack of medications also began to take effect. As the sun rose on Wednesday morning, he could see a dark cloud hovering in the shaft. The dark cloud had strands coming out of it. These strands turned into animals that began circling around the inside of the shaft. John was hallucinating, brought on by exhaustion, dehydration, and the absence of his depression medication. John began to realize at this point that he was going to die inside of that hole if he didn't get himself out. So he started digging footholds into the wall to try and climb out, even with a broken leg. In John's mind, nobody was coming for him. He was going to have to climb the 100 feet out of this shaft with a broken leg. He began digging footholds in the wall when he heard what sounded like an engine on the outside. He sat back to listen to make sure that it was real when he came face to face with another rattlesnake. He grabbed his stick and beat one last snake to death before Terry's voice echoed through the mine from above. John sat back and just broke down, crying. He had been stuck down in that hole for more than 2 days with a broken leg, no medication, no water, and no food. He couldn't believe that he was finally saved. After 6 hours of stabilizing John's leg and extracting him from the pit, they transported him to Banner University Medical Center in Phoenix. He underwent multiple surgeries for a broken thigh bone just above a previously replaced knee and treated him for a fractured and dislocated ankle. During John's recovery, he stated that while he was trapped, he did see rocks with gold. He wanted to go back down there and collect the gold, but it also might just be time to sell the mine and be done with it altogether. This is True Tragedies. Please like, leave comments, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.